for developing our organics disposal ban. The ban itself, as I mentioned, was one of the most popular. It was actually the most popular suggestion when we went to the public on our solid waste plan. It seemed like everybody thought it was a good idea. And then we got into the details of how it would work, and then there were certainly some divergent opinions. In the process, where we worked with business associations and stakeholders and waste haulers and environmental groups and local governments and so on, we looked at a range of different options, some more aggressive than others, and then we took the feedback from the consultation and we ended up here. We also researched the best practices in other jurisdictions. So in particular, we looked at places like Halifax and Nanaimo and Seattle and so on, where other organizations or other local governments have put in organics disposal bans, and we tried to find out what worked well for them and what we thought would work well for us. So what we've ended up with is a phased implementation. For those of you who are familiar with our disposal bans, the way they work is loads of waste are brought to our regional disposal facilities and they get tipped on the floor. So we have an increasing number of full-time inspectors who select loads at random, inspect them visually, and determine whether or not they exceed an allowable threshold of a particular recyclable material. So that's what we refer to as a threshold. So if they see that a load has in excess of the allowable threshold of organics visible, then that load is assessed a surcharge over and above the regular tipping fee. So the public consultation process that we went through determined that they wanted to ease it in. They wanted to have a phased implementation, and this is what we ended up with. So from January 1st to the end of June in 2015, we'll have essentially an educational period. We'll still have inspectors looking for organics in the loads. They're still going to flag the loads that have excess amounts of organics, but they won't be giving any kind of a penalty in terms of financial surcharges. What they will be doing is giving out some sort of an educational notice to let the person that delivered that load of waste know that they had an excessive amount of organics. That threshold, once they start enforcing it, will be in July 1st. And for the rest of the second half of 2015, they'll be looking for loads that visually have more than 25% organics. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you a picture of what that would look like. One of the common questions we have is, how can they possibly see inside the bags? And I could lie and say that our inspectors are all mutants with X-ray vision, but no, they're not. They work within the constraints of what is safe and what is practical. And so loads come in, they don't have the ability or the direction to rip open every single bag they see. All they can do is look at what's visible on the surface. That said, there are still plenty of loads that come in that at a glance you can tell have more than 25% organics by volume. And so by phasing it in with this 25% threshold and then decreasing that threshold in successive years, we're essentially starting out by looking for the, if you will, the worst offenders first, or the ones who are causing most of the organics to be put in. When loads come in and they are clearly a large proportion of organics, these tend to be certain types of businesses. They tend to be grocery stores and very large restaurants. And so those are going after the big fish first in 2015. Those are the businesses that are going to be the most affected. Now that said, those are also the businesses that stand the most to gain by getting organics out of the waste. If you happen to be a grocery store where 50% of your waste load is organics, you stand to certainly reduce the amount of waste you dispose of, reduce the waste service that you require for it, and offset costs to some degree that way. I mentioned that the threshold that our inspectors will be looking for will decrease in 2016 and again in 2017. In the consultation that we had, we agreed that it would be 10% and then 5%. That is still subject to change. When we make these changes to enforcement, that's done through a tipping fee bylaw that is revised and then formally passed by our board at the end of each year. And so while we intend to drop it to 10% and then 5%, what actually happens is a little hard to predict. The surcharge, once we start applying it, is going to be 50% over and above the current tipping fee. The current tipping fee is a little over $100 a ton here in Metro Vancouver. So if you had a load that was 10 tons and you were found to have an excessive amount of organics after July 1st, then you would be assessed with essentially an extra $500 penalty on that load. So it is a pretty substantial incentive to get the organics out. As for the materials that are included, it is referred to as the organics disposal ban. And when we started the public consultation, our intent, or at least one of the scenarios that we talked about, was including essentially all organics. So not just food scraps, but also food soiled paper. So we're talking about napkins, paper towels, paper plates, paper cups, pizza boxes, wax cardboard, and so on. One of the interesting things we didn't expect coming out of the consultation was that we weren't able to include food soiled paper for various reasons, and one of them is the limitations of local processors, and also the fact that there were compostable papers and then they were marginally compostable papers. Some that were coated, some that were there are biodegradable plastics on the market that in some cases appear to be suitable for composting and in some cases are not accepted by our local processors. So to keep things simple and to walk before we run, we decided that this organics disposal ban would be best implemented as essentially a food waste disposal ban, at least initially. Certainly in the future, as technologies change and as processors become more comfortable with certain things, they can certainly, or we can certainly look at expanding the number of materials that are actually included in this. But for now, it is food waste. And by food waste, we're referring not just to unpackaged food, but also packaged food. That will be a challenge. We understand that. There's a limited number of food depackagers in the region. But really, when it comes to the types of food waste that is readily visible in a waste load, that tends to be unpackaged food more so than packaged. We're going to be enforcing, well, as we do with all our disposal bans, the organics disposal ban is going to be enforced at all of our disposal facilities. And as I mentioned before, we'll enforce them to the degree that we're able to, recognizing that we don't have the ability to force waste to come to our facilities. I mentioned that the inspection is done for visible organics by volume. So they don't open the bags, they do it by estimating volumetrically how much of the waste load is organics. And then they add a 50% surcharge. You can see from these two photographs the difference between a load that our inspectors would have said was in excess of 25% organics in the upper right, and a load that they say is less than 5%, and therefore even in the later years would not be assessed a surcharge for organics. These are actually just photographs taken from a recent waste composition study. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the things that we're doing to try and help people make that transition from, a world without an organics disposal ban to a world with one. And in addition to phasing the ban in, as I've mentioned before. this is a list, I'll go through some of them, of campaigns and resources as we had originally planned them. And I say originally planned because the recent changes or the recent rejection of bylaw 280 means that there's some, it's no secret here, there's some uncertainty now about how Metro Vancouver will fund the solid waste function that we have if waste is not necessarily coming into the system. That does mean that there's some concerns or uncertainty about how much we can actually spend on things like recycling outreach. Nonetheless, our intent is still to do all that we can to help. We are doing a regional ad campaign with our member municipalities, and I'll show some examples of that shortly, and also looking to do the same thing with businesses. Standardizing communications, signage and colors and that sort of thing, which I'll show in a moment, and developing some toolkits and guides, and working with stakeholders, which is something we've actually been doing for years now, working with specific business associations, especially in industries that produce a lot of food waste. This is our newest campaign, which it consists of these funny personified food items because they're cute and fun. Personally, I find a watermelon with teeth and a tongue kind of creepy, but maybe that's just me. Apparently it does work, that these food items are directing us to recycle them. In all the samples I'm going to show after this, the text is essentially the same, but the emphasis will be slightly different. But the messages are, that food is not garbage, and food scraps belong in your green bin. These files, by the way, these images and so on, are available on our website so that anyone else in, say, another part of Canada, if they wanted to use them for their own organics promotion campaign, they're absolutely welcome to take them, rebrand them, put their own logo on it. We're happy to share that. Okay, so here's a couple of more examples. Again, you can see the emphasis is slightly different in each one. In one case, the big letters are green bin, the other one it's food scraps. It's arguably more of aimed at a residential audience since they're talking about green bin. And in Metro Vancouver, virtually all of the single-family homes in this region already have some sort of curbside collection of food scraps. Obviously, multifamily will face the same challenges that every place that's brought in a food scraps disposal ban has faced. Multifamily will definitely be challenging, and we don't have any magic solutions any more than any of those other places do. Oh, and by the way, we are aware, thank you, if anyone's going to tell us, we are aware the pork chop is undercooked. Now, these ads or these images appear right now all over the place. They're in poster format in a lot of transit shelters, bus shelters, and in our train stations and so on. And they seem to be quite well received. I've actually seen a couple of them appear on television as well, which is, as long as we can afford to do that, we will. I mentioned standardizing of messaging. When we've been working with our municipalities and with business associations and so on, we identified that there was a desire for more consistent recycling images and color schemes across the region. When you go from one municipality to another or from one business to another, there seems to be a lot of variation. If you're accustomed to throwing apple cores in a yellow bin in one place and you find out that it's a green bin in another place and so on, it can get a little bit confusing. So one of the things we are trying to do is to encourage businesses and school districts and institutions across the region to adopt a color scheme that we're suggesting here, and to use specific icons and images that we have available. And again, as with the Food Isn't Garbage campaign, all of these images and the technical specifics about the color choices and so on are all available from Metro Vancouver, and we're happy for anybody who wants to use them to use them. That said, we're not regulating this, and we wouldn't, but we certainly are encouraging people to adopt these. And as time goes on, more and more businesses and institutions are doing exactly that, because when people see consistent direction, they do follow them better. As for specific toolkits and resources, there's a bunch of them listed here. I'll mention the food donation guidelines. We estimate in this region that about 13,000 tons a year of healthy, edible food is thrown out annually. So this is food that didn't need to be thrown out, it just was, and it could have been donated to feed people, for example. We've been working with the BC Centre for Disease Control and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to develop a new guideline for potential food donors and recipients, so that we can make donating food, healthy food, easier and to promote that. Certainly one of the things that has been of most concern to businesses and people wanting to potentially as food donors has been a fear of liability. And so, for example, the guide that's being put out by the BC Centre for Disease Control highlights the fact that British Columbia, like I think all provinces, has essentially a Good Samaritan Act. Here it's called the BC Food Donor Encouragement Act, I believe, which protects food donors from the liability in case something goes wrong. Certainly, if food is donated with good intent, if good food is donated with good intent, then you're not going to be legally liable. That's the intent of the Food Donor Encouragement Act. We've also been working with business improvement associations, and because many small businesses are members of the BIAs, and business improvement associations that we've worked with have been very good about providing information and support to their members in meeting new regulations. They've also, a couple of them have also been very good at capturing case studies for us and making presentations on our behalf and providing information through their newsletters and so on. Maybe I'll just touch on a couple of other items on here. On-site organics management options. There are some businesses and institutions that have essentially the critical mass, if you will, that produce enough organics to consider whether or not they could manage their organics on site. So rather than having organics separated from their garbage and hauled off to, say, a composting facility, some businesses and institutions have said, could we manage them on site? What are our options for doing that? And that's one thing that Metro Vancouver is just wrapping up a study on. We haven't quite published the final report yet, but it looks at variations in collection options, variations in storage options, the option of dehydrating your organics or digesting or composting them on site. And then hopefully we will be able to sum that up and provide some basic steps that an organization or a business can go through to decide which of those options is right for them. I think we did identify in our stakeholder engagement that there's a need for videos. People seem to like to read less and less, and videos seem to be a more effective way now of educating and increasing awareness. And so we are producing a bunch of videos. I'll show some screenshots from one in a moment. And also I'll point out that here in Metro Vancouver, the Recycling Council of BC, we've engaged with them, and they are going to be providing assistance to businesses in terms of referring them to service providers and answering basic questions about the organics disposal ban on our behalf. These are screenshots from a video that is currently under production. It actually hasn't been finished yet, but it's an example of one that is being produced to provide specifically restaurants, in this case, with assistance and advice, specific tips about what they can do, what has worked for certain restaurants, and recognizing some of the challenges that are out there. So it includes interviews with, as you can see, a couple of different people from specific restaurants in the region. I'll just point out up in the upper left corner, you can see a little touch screen there, and that's from the Lean Path pilot that we've been running, which is a program for restaurants to monitor and reduce their waste of food. It comes out of the U.S., and we've been sort of working on trying to create a kinder, gentler version of it for smaller restaurants. Ultimately, all of these technical resources that we produce are going to be either hosted or linked online. This is the landing page, if you will. It's metrovancouver.org/foodscraps. This is where you'd end up, and all of the resources that we have and all the ones that we're going to have will end up being available here. And as I mentioned, there's a few places for information, including the Recycling Council of BC, which is that phone number at the bottom, 604-RECYCLE. And of course, you can go to our website at www.metrovancouver.org/foodscraps, or you can just email our information center if you have a question that you can't find an answer to there. So thanks everyone for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have at this point.
All right, thank you, Andrew. This is Jolene. Sorry about not replying earlier. My screen blacked out for a second, but I was able to get back on. Assuming you can't hear me right now.
Yep, I can. Thanks.
Okay, good. So we did get one question already. You have a rather large audience, and we got lots of time for questions here. So people ask away. You can either raise your hand, click on the little hand icon, and I can unmute you, or you can type your question into the chat, and then I'll read it aloud for Andrew. So the first question was, will plastic bags, like clear bags, be required in the future, and when?
Okay, plastic bags are not allowed in with the compost at this point.
So, can I just rephrase that?
Sure.
The clear bags for the inspection.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right.
Is what it was regarding to.
Okay. For those of you who are, just for the benefit of people who aren't familiar with this one, some locations, some locales have mandated the use of transparent garbage bags for the purposes of identifying things inside, so that it basically makes inspections for disposal bans easier. We are looking at that. It would have to be done on a municipality by municipality basis. As I mentioned, we've got a couple of dozen municipalities in the region, so it would be a little bit challenging. It's like having a couple of dozen kids in the family and hoping they'll all get along. There are definite benefits to having the clear plastic bags, and we do recognize that it seems to have worked in some places. We've also heard some feedback from some places where it's been used that there have been some unintended consequences. For example, you may have businesses or people that have bought 5 years worth of black garbage bags and now suddenly have to throw them out. Or in some cases, some jurisdictions have said, we will allow clear plastic bags, but you're allowed to put opaque plastic bags inside it to protect the privacy of your waste. Nonetheless, from what we've seen, and we've been actually looking at photographs of waste from other jurisdictions that have been using clear garbage bags, and it definitely does look like it would make our inspection process easier. So like I said, we haven't made a decision about it, but it's definitely looking like a good possibility here.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Scott Kerr from Harvest Power in BC, and he's asking, you said trucks were audited at random. Approximately what percentage of landfill trucks are inspected for their organics content?
Let me see. I'm not sure of the current percentage. I believe it's around a quarter of them. It's impractical to inspect every single one of them. We have been looking at ways in which we can streamline the process and increase the number or the percentage of loads that get inspected. As it is right now, we do inspect a large number, like in the tens of thousands of loads per year. But as I mentioned, we have 7 full-time inspectors. They're inspecting as many loads as they possibly can. Like as I mentioned, we are looking at ways in which we can shorten the amount of time that each inspection takes so that we can bump up that number to more than its current.
And in addition to that question, did you have to hire more enforcement staff?
Yes, I believe the current number is 7 full-time inspectors working at our facilities, and that's increased by 1 just in the last year, I believe. When it first started out, I think we only had 2 or 3, so it's been growing each year. And I think, as we mentioned during our organics disposal ban consultation meetings, the cost of these inspectors, so far at least, has been essentially balanced by the increases in disposal ban surcharges. So it's actually quite surprising, but they've been almost identical, the cost and the revenues.
Next question from Eldon Wallman from the city of Steinbach. To where are the organics being diverted? Now, you had mentioned either composting facilities, biofuels, or a new one that creates animal feed. How many are registered facilities? Maybe it could be in addition to that question. And are these facilities being managed by Metro Vancouver or by external organizations?
Okay. Virtually all of the organics processing facilities in this region are privately owned and operated. There are a couple of minor exceptions, or a couple of exceptions. I would say if you look at the region right now, there's about 300,000 tons, or a little over 300,000 tons a year of organics being diverted from the waste stream and processed. The vast majority of that 300,000 tons goes into composting. Harvest Power, as you mentioned, is the biggest composter in this region. There's another one called EnviroSmart Organics, and another one that services this region called Northwest Organics. But those 3 companies provide the vast majority of the composting capacity in the region. There's also, at this point, a substantial amount of organics, about 27,000 tons a year, that goes to that Harvest Power location to go into their high solids anaerobic digesters to produce biogas. So that's an exciting thing to see, and a relatively small but growing percentage, as I mentioned, going to that Entera facility. I did say there were some exceptions to private ownership and operation of organic processing facilities. One exception is the City of Vancouver does operate a small composting facility for yard trimmings only at their landfill, but it's quite a small annual tonnage. And the other exception that's sort of on the horizon, or is coming up, is a biofuel facility that is planned by the City of Surrey. And they're going through a tendering process for that facility now, but that is certainly a year or 2 away.
Okay. Next question from Lindsay Lopez from CH2M Hill in Oregon. She's saying many of the states in the U.S. and the East Coast are phasing in bans based on implementing a processing facility with proximity attached to it.
Right.
Does Metro Vancouver have anything like that, or is that an issue?
Yeah, we definitely have seen that technique used, where they say that if you're not within, say, 20 kilometers of a processing facility, that the ban doesn't apply to you. In this region, that doesn't really, we didn't go with that, and part of the reason is because the processing facilities are within a reasonable distance. Certainly we would get some argument from some businesses who say that the cost of hauling to Richmond or to the Fraser Valley or to Delta is high, but we didn't feel that the processing facilities available in this region were so far removed that we would allow an exemption for distance.
Mm-hmm. It does also make enforcement more difficult, correct?
It does. It becomes a bit of an administrative challenge, certainly, and I'd love to speak to some of the people that have been trying to make that determination. But yes, administratively, to say you are within a certain distance and then you are within a certain size, I can see the challenges, certainly, of allowing too many exemptions.
Okay, great. Moving on, lots of questions here. This is a quick one from Mary Forbes from the Caribou-Chilcotin Conservation Society in BC. Will biodegradable or compostable bags be allowed in your composting stream?
Okay. At this point, we have to recognize that the organic material that is collected and diverted has to be acceptable to the local processors. So it's up to the processing facilities whether they will accept biodegradable products. And so, for example, a polylactic acid-based biodegradable plastic bag may in fact be certified by various agencies as being compostable. However, a local processor of organics, it's their prerogative to make the call as to whether or not they will accept that particular product or not. And there is such a range of products right now, and such a range of processors, that we couldn't come up with a one-size-fits-all. We couldn't say, yes, all biodegradable plastics of this type are acceptable in all of the processing facilities in the region. So the safest thing for us to do was to simply say it's not part of the ban, and it's that they should check with their, a business, for example, should check with their hauler, who in turn would check with the processing facility they're going to, as to whether or not they accept it. So yes, a processing facility definitely can make the decision to accept biodegradable plastic bags, but that it's their decision and not ours.
Okay. Next one from Karen Horgan, region of Peel, Ontario. Is there enough processing capacity in the region for the expected volume of organics? And is there more than one, or is there going to be new technologies being used in the future?
Okay. As I mentioned, there's about 300,000 tons of organics processed in the region each year. We have talked to all of the major processors and asked them about their abilities to expand, and we do essentially an annual inventory of the processing capacity, and yes, we're comfortable with the ability of the local processors to expand. There are other businesses who have said that that they would like to start up new capacity. There's about, I'm going to really round off some numbers here, but in the garbage right now, there's easily another 500,000 tons of organic material, not all of it food, but organic material, and we'd be happy if we got even half of that. Now, the half of that would be, 250,000 tons, which would almost double the capacity the existing organics processing capacity in the region. Certainly from our discussions with local processors, it sounds like that is within the realm of possibility within the next few years.
Okay, and from
sorry, I'm sorry. I guess there was the other question about new technologies in the future. I'm afraid I have no idea. Certainly, organics processing is one of the most innovative industries around. Certainly, we've looked at, we're aware of things that are being done elsewhere, particularly in Europe and so on. I would suggest that most of those technologies that are more common in Europe are probably going to be coming over here. For example, food macerators and dewaterers are apparently quite common in the UK, but you'd be hard-pressed to find one here in the Lower Mainland.
Interesting. Okay, and a follow-up to that, East Faraday is asking from CVRD in BC, are there any concerns with the volume of compost that will now be produced? I think Metro was working on a new procurement policy. Where is this policy at?
Okay. The market for compost is absolutely top of mind. That said, the marketing of compost isn't something that we do. It's something that the processors of organics that produce compost, they do that. We have a role to play in trying to encourage as much of its use as we can. For that reason, as you mentioned, we're working on changing something called the Master Municipal Construction Documents, essentially the Bible of specifications by which most municipal engineering and construction departments work. And so there are things like certain applications for soils and so on where compost could be used in its place. And so we're working with trying to change the MMCD to increase the demand for compost that way. But that said, as I said, the marketing of compost isn't really our function. We have had conversations with local processors, and they've certainly indicated to us that they are also working on marketing of compost, as they should. Metro Vancouver, British Columbia is an organics-rich part of the world. We're not like the American Southwest or something. So there is, relatively speaking, a large amount of compost, but there's also, fortunately, a reasonable potential for its use. Agriculture and landscaping certainly are the big ones. But as I mentioned, we are working with MMCD to try and increase its use in things like municipal projects and highway rehabilitation and so on.
Okay. This is going to be a combination of a couple questions because they're related to the ICI sector and collection of the organic waste. So you mentioned the resources available for grocery stores and restaurants. Is there will it be the waste haulers? Is there a directory for who can be contacted to collect the waste? Or will it be municipal haulers also be collected? How is that all being done?
Okay. In most of the municipalities in Metro Vancouver, the collection of organics is left to the private sector. There are, as there always are in this region, there are some exceptions. There are 2 or 3 municipalities that do provide organics collection service to businesses, and some of them that are providing it either in whole or on a pilot basis to multifamily residences. But for the most part, it's done by the private sector in this region. There are directory of haulers, yes. Certainly, the Recycling Council of BC maintains a database of service providers for all things waste and recycling related, including organics. And Metro Vancouver has a similar one at metrovancouverrecycles.org.
And to follow up with that, we noticed that some waste haulers charge on a per collection fee as opposed to a weight fee. Therefore, sometimes it can be difficult to see cost reductions in organics collection versus just garbage collection. Is that the same case there, or do your waste haulers collect on a weight basis versus collection number?
Most of the commercial hauling here is done on a per pickup basis. So the larger your bin, the more expensive it is, and the more often you have it collected, the more expensive it is. What we try and communicate to businesses certainly is that as you divert your organics, organics and food waste in particular is very dense, so you may not see a large reduction in the volume of your garbage, but what you will have is garbage that doesn't necessarily need to be collected as often. The collection of garbage, historically has been done weekly for the purposes of interrupting the breeding cycle of the housefly, which is, I believe, around 10 days, and have it collected every 7 days or so interrupts that cycle. If you're doing a good job of keeping food waste out of your garbage, then what you have is non-putrescible waste that, really there's no reason why it couldn't sit for more than 7 days, and therefore you could have your garbage collected less frequently. Certainly that's been the experience of municipalities that have switched their residential collection schedules to, once they provide food scraps collection curbside, they start collecting garbage bi-weekly. And so the same concept applies for businesses as a way of hopefully offsetting at least some of the costs of collecting organics.
And another question on the timing of the collection. How often are the green bins being picked up, and is it a seasonal thing? Can you reduce the number of pickups in the winter because of the colder temperatures not creating such an odor with decomposition?
Right. So we're talking now about residential collection at curbside for organics, and I don't know all of the municipalities off the top of my head, but I believe that they are all collecting the food scraps year-round on a weekly basis. I don't know of anyone, and none come to mind, that are doing it on anything less than a weekly basis. That's for really two reasons. One is that in Metro Vancouver, and this will sound like we're bragging to the rest of Canada, but it doesn't get that cold here in the winter. In fact, you might have temperatures below freezing for maybe 7 or 8 days in the year, and so you can't really rely on your food scraps being frozen. The other reason that it's collected on a weekly basis is that we do have, an urban area, but we also have suburban areas that are bordering on mountain ranges and so on. So we have, like many other places, no shortage of raccoons and bears and so on. And so collecting it on a weekly basis is just, it's just good practice.
I don't know if Susan and the Compost Council let you know, but I'm from Winnipeg, so we have quite the opposite problem. We do get a little colder here, yes.
Do you? Okay.
Climate is a bit different. Another great question came up here from Joan Amonti from Quebec. She is saying that I assume the trucks collect some material from multiple businesses, and perhaps they go to a grocery store and then it's diluted with waste from a business that maybe is meeting the 25% threshold. How is the surcharge divided, and who's paying the bill?
Okay, no.
How do you track the offender, basically?
Right, definitely a popular question. We assess the surcharge to our customer, and our customer is the person driving the truck. We don't actually have any legal power to go upstream of that, so we can't go to an individual business, for example, look in their garbage bin and say, you know, you're not diverting organics, and assess a fine at the source. All we can do is assess a surcharge at the receiving end when the truck comes in. So it's the driver of the vehicle, or the hauling company rather, that needs to go back and deal with their customers if they're causing them problems. And absolutely, trucks do come in and they'll have made 15 or 20 stops along the way, and along the way they may have, you know, good performers and bad performers in terms of getting the recyclables out of the garbage. You know, this is where I've had conversations with haulers who have said, absolutely, they can go back and they can track who's causing the problem on a route. I've also had other haulers who have said in public meetings that that is pie in the sky. So, you know, recognizing there are these two different expressed opinions from the hauling industry, all I can say is that I've certainly talked to a number of haulers who say they can identify the bad performers. In some cases, it's simply a matter of saying, you know, on my route, I have, you know, a buffet restaurant and a real estate office and a fire hall. And gee, which one of those would be the ones that put too much organics into this load? But you know, to be fair, I've also had haulers who have told me that it's absolute nonsense, and they have no ability to know who on their route is likely to be responsible for putting organics or other recyclable materials in. I personally find that a little hard to believe, since you know you're collecting from a business, you know what type of business it is, you can see what kind of services they have, whether they have an organics recycling bin, for example, whether they recycle their cardboard and so on. Nonetheless, there are those differing opinions, and but you know, to answer the question, you know, it is the hauler that has to deal with their customers, and we deal with ours.
Okay, this is a quite specific question on how the inspection is done. Will the 25% of the organics be calculated the same way the 5% of the old corrugated cardboard is being calculated? Basically, the inspector visually divides the load into 4 quarters and focuses on the quarter with the most banned material in it, or do they focus on the whole load as a total?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what that meant, but the inspectors do inspect or will inspect for organics in exactly the same way that they've inspected for other banned materials. You said that, sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Yeah, basically, will it be done by quartering up the load and focusing on the worst part of it, or by the total load? And that's something, yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, neither am I.
Would there be standard procedures that you could?
Yeah, I do know that our inspectors are currently working with our operations group to write a standard operating procedure for doing the inspections. And yes, it's a bit surprising that we didn't already have one, but yeah, they are writing a formal process for doing that. I don't know about the quartering and focusing in on the worst quarter, but
maybe a question you can get back to.
Yeah.
We do still have a couple more, but we are running out of time. Did we want to keep going, or should we end it here?
I'm certainly fine to keep going.
Okay, maybe we'll go for another 5 more minutes here, and just finish up the questions I have. This actually was from Alan Peterson from the Peterson Group in California. He's had his hand up for a while. I'm going to unmute him and see if he is able to. Alan, are you able to, is your audio working?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Okay, perfect. First, thank you for the very good presentation and information that's going to help all of us in the industry in the Vancouver Metro Vancouver area. You had mentioned that there is images on the website for some of the artwork that you'd shown. I wanted to see if there's actually source artwork available, in as much as I know we'd like to leverage the good work that you've already invested into the campaign so that we can optimize, leverage, and standardize wherever possible. So we'd be looking for source artwork for any of the images, the actual photography, and or for the logos and the other icons that you shared.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, I'm just going to go back one slide here. Probably your best thing to do is just send an email to that information center address, and with your specific request. I know that all of the source artwork and the original photographs and such are all available. They may not be immediately available for download from the website itself. It's been a while since I've wandered through there, but they're definitely available, and we're definitely happy to share with anybody that wants to make use of them, as long as there's no copyright issues. But I don't believe there are. I think in most cases, the images we've used, it's all original photography that we've done ourselves, and so there shouldn't be any problem in providing that to you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. The next question comes from Marie-Claude Bouffard from Solenove, I hope I said that right, in Quebec. And she's asking, will there be a modification of the laws to facilitate storage of bins and containers? I assume this is in regards to restaurants, because there are some regulations involved with the amount of time that bins can be stored. I hope that is correct.
Right. It is definitely more of an issue for some of our member municipalities than others, but it's no different than the space constraints that you know, the large American cities have faced. Certainly, if you can imagine the space issues in a place like downtown Boston, it certainly downtown Vancouver is no worse than that. There are municipal bylaws in some cases that appear to be restrictive or getting in the way of adding bins and containers for organic separation. We know that all of our member municipalities are working specifically on that to try and reduce those barriers wherever they may exist. At the same time, Metro Vancouver did produce a technical specification, a guideline, if you will, detailing how much recycling space and what kind of physical access is required or is best for it for new construction and major renovations. Recognizing that that doesn't help existing businesses, but certainly for newer businesses that is available. And anyways, the modification of existing bylaws is up to each individual municipality. But as I said, they are aware of the problems that those existing bylaws may cause, and they are working to change them.
Okay, and this will be the last question that we ask. And just as a reminder that the presentation we do make available on the Compost Council of Canada website. I was a little slow in starting the recording today, but the recording of the presentation will also be available. So the question is that some of the City of Vancouver waste hauling trucks run on methane or biogas. Will in the future, or do you know of some now, that the trucks run on gas powered by food waste, produced by food waste?
Well, I guess that's up to the City of Vancouver, whether or not they purchase biogas produced from food waste. But it's at least the way I understand that it works. If biogas is produced from food waste, one of the options they have is to upgrade it to pipeline grade and then inject it into the local natural gas utilities pipeline. So in essence, you may be using biogas from food without realizing it. But the right to say that you've used biogas produced from a green source like food waste is something that you pay a premium for. I don't know if the City of Vancouver specifically is doing that or is going to be doing that. I do know that the City of Surrey, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that they are procuring a biofuel facility, roughly 80,000 tons, I believe, per year, to produce biogas from household and business organics. And I understand that it is absolutely the City of Surrey's intent to use some of that biogas to fuel their municipal fleet.
Okay, excellent. So all the resources that you talked about in your presentation, are they available by looking up Metro Vancouver, or how would somebody access them?
Yeah, the best thing to do is visit that website that's on the screen right now, and
okay.
Hopefully what you're looking for is there. And if it isn't, then just send an email to that email address at the top.
Excellent. Okay, so I hope I was able to get to everyone's questions and ask them appropriately. If you do have any more questions, you can either send them to the Compost Council or to Metro Vancouver. And with that, I think we will end the webinar here.
Thanks very much.
So thank you all for attending, and thank you very much, Andrew, for presenting.
You're very welcome. Bye now.
Perfect.